I see progress. Almost every year, there are at least one or two countries which are announced to be malaria-free by the World Health Organization. So I see that as really great progress. And if you have a look at the malaria map, the map of all of the countries which have malaria, it is shrinking year by year.
When do you expect us to start seeing the impact?
I think we're seeing the impact already. My colleagues in Ethiopia tell me that the PMI officers there had bed nets that they were going to distribute. PMI distributes up to 37 million bed nets each year. And so that's not going to happen. That is not happening. There are 6 countries that only have a 3-month supply of rapid tests, and 5 countries that only have a 3-month supply of ACTs, which are the main anti-malarial drug. So we're already seeing the impact now. Other colleagues in Uganda seeing there are problems with paying electricity bills.
Can you still remember the first time malaria came on your radar?
I can actually, and it was when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Edinburgh University, and I'm a geneticist, so I study the genes of an organism, and I was doing what's called my honours project, and I was looking around for a lab, and it turned out that there was a really big malaria group, famous malaria group, in the department of where I worked, working on the genetics of malaria. And at that stage, I was a little not keen about studying or using genetics to study mice or fruit flies. I wanted something that really mattered. And so that's when I got bitten by the bug of malaria. So, yeah, that was in the 80s, I think.
So I'm curious to know how the malaria landscape has evolved over the years from your personal perspective. So what can you say about the evolution of malaria landscape?
Sure. Well, I'm biased though, because I'm a geneticist. I study genes, and there was a revolution in how we analyze the genes of organisms through the genomics, through whole genome sequencing. And I think for me, the real turning point was when we managed to sequence the first genomes of the malaria parasites. So I was involved and led the projects for 2 of those, Plasmodium falciparum, which is the most virulent, most dangerous Plasmodium parasite, and then Plasmodium vivax as well. And so as soon as you have the whole genome sequence of an organism, you can identify all of the genes and then all of the proteins, and then start to deconvolute the metabolic pathways and how the malaria parasite is evolving in response to anti-malarial drugs or perhaps vaccines. And so for me, that was the real turning point, and that happened in the early 2000s. And that was the first time really that a eukaryotic microbe, so a microbe not different from a bacterial organism, had been decoded. And I think it really changed how a lot of us worked on the parasite.
If we look at the promise of genomics and procedures like the genome sequencing in revolutionizing our ability to respond to diseases, looking at what we've been able to achieve so far with malaria, do you think genomics has lived up to its expectations, to its hype?
That's a really interesting point, actually. And I think you ask some people and they would say definitely no. I think we're not quite there yet either. But I think there was a heavy expectation that was put on perhaps on the shoulders of people who had decoded the genome, that suddenly, it would really change the way that malaria is treated. And that's not the case. It's the first stepping stone. It's the first resource to have a genome sequence. And then there's lots of work that goes on after that. Undoubtedly, without a genome sequence, it's very difficult to do subsequent steps. But now we've sort of entered into what's called precision medicine, where not only do you have the sequence of the malaria parasite, but you've got the sequence of the human host as well. And then there have been sequences of the mosquito vector that have been generated too. And having the mosquito and the parasite genome sequences, you can then start to see how the parasite is evolving in different parts of the world, what's called population genomics or genomic epidemiology. So that can really tell us about the epidemiology of the disease. And then as far as generating new drugs or potential new vaccine candidates, we're slowly getting there. I think one of the problems has been that when we decoded the malaria parasite genome, a lot of the genes, a lot of the proteins didn't have function. We didn't know what they do. And that takes time to try and identify that. It's something that my group is working on at the moment.
Okay, that's impressive. Looking at the early days of genomics promises around malaria and other diseases, we seem to be in another phase, another chapter with artificial intelligence. I think over the weekend, the major tech CEO said in the next 10 years, through the help of AI, we are going to have drugs to almost every disease. Looking back at the early days of genomics with malaria and other diseases, what insights can you share regarding this level of promises around artificial intelligence in medicine?
Yes, artificial intelligence actually is a really interesting area of research and development, and it's progressing very fast. There's one area, like a subsection of AI, called machine learning, which is something that many people are starting to use. And that's because it takes on large bodies of data, and then programs learn and can be able to produce predictions. And that's very useful in malaria research in several ways. The first is by using developing machine learning models, we can try to forecast where malaria may pop up. So that's one application right away. Another application is by developing machine learning models, which can be used for malaria diagnosis. So in many clinics around the globe, the way that you diagnose a parasite is by taking a finger prick and then putting it on a glass slide and staining it and looking under a microscope. And now there are powerful algorithms which have been generated that can try and detect the malaria parasites in those what are called blood smears. So that's another area where machine learning has been coming in. Not as successful as I would have liked, I must admit. And then another area too is an area that we work on, and that's using what are called protein language models, PLMs. And so that's a different type of machine learning, which enables predictions about proteins to be made, predictions about their structure in particular. And you need to have the structure of a protein to be able to see how to develop a drug against it, for example, how the drug might interact with that particular protein. And previously we used to develop protein structures by what's called crystallization, which could take years, and sometimes we didn't produce good structures. And now with protein language models, we can actually generate those much faster. And in fact, the Nobel laureates, 3 of them last year, or was it this year? I can't remember, in chemistry, won the Nobel Prize for developing AlphaFold, which is a protein language model which can predict protein structures. And then that's also very useful if you want to start to design proteins as well. For example, in novel rapid diagnostic tests, where you want to try and capture antibodies against a particular protein found in the blood of infected people. Yes, so AI, different components of AI, I think are going to be very important in the future for malaria research.
I'm guessing you are a big fan of AI and its promises in the area of malaria research, and I think you communicated that beautifully well in its potential applications. Now, let's talk about malaria interventions over the years. I think there are countries that had already eliminated malaria long before the introduction or the approval of the vaccines. We have a lot of milestones that had predated these new tools. Even the ages where you had to use the microscope to do the detection, not even before the point of care evolution. We have a wide array of drugs and several other tools now at our disposal. Yet every year we still record millions of cases and thousands of deaths of malaria. So looking at the progresses made and the vacuum still existing, do you see it as a paucity of lack of enough tools, or where do you see the major problem with ending malaria?
And you mean in terms of lack of progress?
Yes.
Yes. So I want to turn that on its head, actually, because, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think there are 44 countries which are malaria-free. The majority of countries which still have a problem with malaria are based in Africa. So I see progress, actually. Almost every year, there are at least 1 or 2 countries which are announced to be malaria-free by the World Health Organization. Just last year, Egypt, which has one of the largest populations of any African country, was announced to be malaria-free. So I see that as really great progress, actually. And if you have a look at the malaria map, the map of all of the countries which have malaria, it is shrinking year by year. One of the countries that I've worked in for many years, India, I've worked there for the past 20 years, that really has plummeted the number of cases and the number of deaths from over 20 million cases 25 years ago to 2 million cases this year, and the number of deaths too. And I would never have expected that, quite honestly. So I see tremendous progress. The introduction of the 2 World Health Organization vaccines, approved vaccines, I think that's going to be a tremendous breakthrough. I think 19 countries in Africa now have actually rolled out their vaccination program for children under the age of 5. And we're already hearing, though it's still early days, of great gains actually in protection in terms of malaria cases and morbidity. So that's great. There are new bed nets as well, which are being rolled out, dual action bed nets, to really try and mitigate insecticide resistance. And there are other innovative tools as well, which are starting to be used, seasonal chemoprophylaxis, for example. So I think bit by bit we are getting there, which is why it's so important to keep up the pressure and not to stop now. Malaria is one of the top 3 infectious diseases, with TB, HIV, AIDS as well. But it's treatable and it's curable. Unlike HIV, AIDS, there's no cure for that. There's no vaccine. And TB, there are these multiple resistant strains. Malaria elimination is really within our sight. And that's why I think we need to keep up the pressure so that we can get there.
So let's give me an overview of the current research landscape at the Institute. So what are the exciting researches ongoing over there that you consider to be quite promising to achieving this vision of ending malaria?
Yeah. Well, we're a very active institute. There are about 16 or so, soon to be joined by new faculty, research groups that make up the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute. We've been continuously funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies through very generous gifts. And we undertake a whole gamut of research, from very basic research looking at biochemical pathways, the molecular biology of the malaria parasite and the Anopheles mosquito, all the way through to more applied and translational studies, looking at the epidemiology of the disease in our field sites, looking at how mosquitoes are attracted to infected people. So it's a real breadth, I would say, of disciplines that we bring to try and answer and develop better tools for control and treatment of malaria. And some of the very exciting things that we have going on at the moment, one of our collaborators has been developing a bio-pesticide, which is a particular bacterium that can be made into pellets and then put into larval bodies of water-containing larvae, and which is toxic to mosquitoes, but it's a natural compound. So we're looking into developing that and scaling up and putting that into field trials. We're looking into a whole package of interventions for low endemic areas where people who are an index case, so somebody who has a malaria infection, is treated, and then all of the people in that vicinity of that person, whether it be their household or a little further out, are also treated, a sort of a mechanism to really try and eliminate the parasite on a very focused level. We're also, as I mentioned, trying to develop machine learning models to characterize the malaria parasite genome better and identify better biomarkers in the blood of infected people that could be then developed into better diagnostic tests. So it's a whole range of different activities we have ongoing.
Wow. So are these researches, any of these researches threatened by what is happening in the funding landscape, or do you think the model that you have in funding your researches protects or insulates them from what is happening at the moment?
Yes, well, it's very worrisome, actually. I mean, the changes in malaria funding are on 2 levels. There's malaria funding for control and surveillance, and that's been the most hard hit, in particular through the dissolution of USAID, which funds the President's Malaria Initiative. And that was founded in 2005, interagency initiative led by USAID in partnership with CDC. And there's a US Global Malaria Coordinator who's created by US Congress, appointed by the president, and that position has been dissolved. So in fact, we don't have a malaria coordinator at the moment. And the efforts for the President's Malaria Initiative have been focused on about 30 countries that account for 90% of the world's malaria cases. Last year, about $780 million was provided to PMI, and that benefited more than 700 million people in primarily African countries. 37 million bed nets were delivered, over 100 million rapid diagnostic tests delivered, 63 million malaria medicines. And studies have been undertaken, modeling studies, and then also an internal memo by USAID that's shown that if PMI is discontinued, which it looks very likely, then there could be an increase of up to 18 million more malaria cases and up to 160,000 more malaria deaths if PMI is halted. And we already know through WHO rapid surveys that many of the WHO country officers have reported moderate to severe disruptions to malaria services and to medicines. And the Rollback Malaria Initiative also has a dashboard which shows the supplies of rapid tests and malaria medicines, and those are being severely affected. So this is all very, very concerning. And then on the other hand, we have funds which have gone to malaria research and development. And we already know that the US administration has cancelled the majority of USAID awards, and many of those were also research awards too. We know at the National Institutes of Health that some of the malaria awards there have also been put on hold, and it's unclear of what's going to happen to them going forward. So it is a very worrisome time. The Malaria Research Institute does have this amazing support of Bloomberg Philanthropies, but we also get a number of our research grants from NIH and also from USAID. So it is very worrisome all round.
So in the short term, how have you been coping? I think we are seeing loads of different approaches to dealing with the issue. And so what is the Institute's coping strategy at the moment?
Well, Institute made up of faculty from different departments. I think we're sort of circling the wagons. We're hunkering down. First off, we're making sure that we're in continued contact with our collaborators and partners in endemic countries. We work in several of those. I mentioned India, but also we have a big footprint in Zambia, and then also Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda. Some of us also work in. And so it's, keeping in contact with them, making sure that we're up to date with the latest knowledge. At the moment, it's difficult to plan. So it's difficult to plan expanded activities. We've had to cut back and cancel trips to our endemic sites just until we see the lay of the land. So I think it's more a bit of a waiting game at the moment and not proceeding too much, continuing to keep the status quo, but still very much keeping in contact with our partners to see how the changing landscape, what's happening there.
One of the arguments they often make is that there is a lot of non-America focused priorities for US government-funded initiatives. So how do you make the case that what is happening is actually supporting the US government and prioritizing the well-being of the American people?
Yes, a colleague once said to me not too long ago, the problem with malaria is Americans don't get it. And that's very true. In fact, there are about 2,000 cases each year of malaria in the United States, and this is primarily travelers going on vacation or back to their home countries and bringing the parasite back with them. And we've had that for years. We, in fact, had some locally acquired malaria cases a couple of years ago because we still have the Anopheles mosquito vector here in the country that can transmit malaria parasites. The United States was endemic for malaria, didn't eliminate it until about the 90s, and actually the same for the UK and parts of Europe as well. So I think it's important for the US and for Americans in general to understand that we are a global series of countries now, that what goes on in one country can affect other countries, and we can get malaria. We know that we need to try and protect Americans when they go abroad and Europeans when they go abroad. So it's still important to develop new drugs, to develop better vaccines. And also it's, malaria is a humanitarian issue. We need to stamp it out. Now's the time to do that. And we need to look after people in other countries as well, because we are very well off in the Western world, but we have a duty to look after other people in other countries too. I very firmly believe that.
I think you made the argument of this perception of the world as a truly global place now. I think global travel highlighted that. So for somebody that is curious to know, to say, what is the essence of these travels that you have to cancel, and what would be the potential implications of this? How do we connect these visits by the Institute to its partners to the overarching goal of controlling malaria? How relevant those trips that have been cancelled now could be to the goals of your research institute?
Right, I see. Yes. I mean, nothing beats a conversation in person. I mean, Zoom is a wonderful thing, but really, if you want to develop research projects, if you have kind of eureka moments, those happen when you meet face to face. We don't practice colonial science. We don't fly into endemic country regions, collect samples, and fly out with them again. It's very important for us as an institute to also be involved in developing the capacity, the human capacity of the colleagues, of the researchers that we partner with in endemic countries, which are primarily in Africa. And so because of that, those interactions are really key. And then we can do training, capacity development, transfer of technology, all those things that really start to build up the capacity in those countries, so that those very countries can take on the research aspects themselves for diseases that affect them the most.
From your perspective, when do you expect us to start seeing the impact of what is happening right now, especially regarding the funding landscape in the key malaria metrics? Are we going to see it in this year's global malaria report? Or at what point do you think everybody will start saying, oh, this is the impact of what we've done? And are you concerned that it may be too late to remedy the situation?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing the impact already. In fact, we know that from the closure of the PMI offices. My colleagues in Ethiopia tell me, for example, that the PMI offices there had bed nets that they were going to distribute. PMI distributes up to 37 million bed nets each year. And so that's not going to happen. That is not happening. We already know that there are 6 countries that only have a 3-month supply of rapid tests, and 5 countries that only have a 3-month supply of ACTs, which are the main anti-malarial drug. So we're already seeing the impact now. Other colleagues in Uganda seeing there are problems with paying electricity bills, of transport of particular supplies. So how that's going to translate, I guess the metric then is increase in number of malaria cases and increase in number of malaria deaths. And it could well be that we do see that in the next World Malaria report. I think that's why keeping in close contact with our partners in malaria countries is very key here, to see how we might be able to mitigate these issues. I know that some countries in Africa, for example, Nigeria, lawmakers there just approved an additional $200 million for the health sector as part of their 2025 spending plan. And this is specifically to mitigate the impact of the recent suspension of the USA foreign aid. And across Africa, countries are also doing this and strengthening their coordination mechanisms too. And the WHO and the World Malaria Partnership to End Malaria have also launched a cross-partner working group of technical experts to try and prevent this. So hopefully these organizations are going to be are stepping up, and that we won't see the increase in cases that these modeling predictions are saying that we will.
For this year's World Malaria Day, so how are you feeling? What are your thoughts around the celebration this year?
Oh yes, so this year we have a theme which is building better mosquitoes. That's the title of our symposium, and the theme is all about engineering mosquitoes so they don't transmit malaria parasites. We're bringing together a whole group of experts nationally and internationally, start arriving today, in fact, and we have a whole gamut of talks, all the way from engineering, genetic engineering of mosquitoes and the different mechanisms and methodologies which are used there, all the way to starting to talk about releasing mosquitoes and some of the social and ethical concerns there, which obviously is something that really needs to be discussed. So very much looking forward to bringing together this group, and we're having a panel as well to discuss the social and ethical concerns in the afternoon. And we have funders coming too, so we hope to get their perspective as well.
That's interesting that you are focusing on genetically modified mosquitoes. Why is that a priority at the moment?
Actually, it's a priority. It's always been a priority for us over the past several years. We have one of the premier people that works in this space, Dr. George Dimopoulos. He has genetically engineered multiple strains of Anopheles mosquito by tweaking their immune system so they don't transmit malaria parasites. And he's been working in this space for more than a decade. But each year, we have decided to take a different theme. Last year was omics, because I had joined the institute. And this year we decided to do building better mosquitoes.
Okay, probably one last question on that, because it's the focus of a story that I wrote for Nature Medicine that will soon be published. Genetically modified mosquitoes. I think in this case it was for Anopheles stephensii. Is Oxitec involved in this meeting?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, because I was in their lab to look at the procedures and how they produce this genetically modified larva. Very interesting and very interesting procedures. So I'm curious to know if you think the market is ready for genetically modified Anopheles mosquitoes, not just for stephensii, but for the major drivers of malaria in Africa, in the context of the current landscape and people prioritizing reducing their costs and just streamlining their expenses so that they can fully utilize and roll out more effectively the current array of tools. So what is your current justification or argument in support of this approach, especially in the present funding, that it will not make the science ecosystem to appear as if, yes, we continue to spend a lot of money and opening new channels to spend more money?
Well, I think the rationale for this is that there isn't just one magic bullet for malaria. We need to attack malaria on multiple fronts, and developing genetically modified mosquitoes is just another area that we should be developing. There are a number of different funders, Bill and Melinda Gates, for example. There's UCMI too. There are different initiatives taking different approaches to developing genetically modified mosquitoes. So I don't think it's a be all and end all. It's one approach that we're investigating, and hopefully it will lead to or be feasible to release genetically modified mosquitoes in the next 6 years, 6 years to a decade. Obviously, there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be done in the meantime. I'm actually not an expert in this area, so I would perhaps ask you to speak to Dr. George Dimopoulos instead. But definitely more research is required before we can start to release mosquitoes.
That's absolutely fine. So let's go back to funding now. And with malaria research as a point of interest, is it realistic to see a future where malaria research funding is truly independent of what is happening in the government of any country that is a major funder of malaria? How do you see malaria research being able to achieve that consistency and not be subjected to differences or changes in government?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't, unfortunately. I think that's a challenge really anywhere, whichever country you may well be in. I would say the United Kingdom has been pretty good for always having a tropical disease research agenda. It's always understood the benefits to developing research for infectious diseases that affect the global south. But, there are issues. Obviously, each time you do have a change in government, these sorts of issues can come up. So I'm not sure it's possible to put into place anything, quite honestly, that can prevent this. More often than not, it's easier just to try and hunker down, weather the storm, perhaps put a few key things in place to protect the research and hope that it will survive until there's a change in administration.
So what's the spirit like among your scientists? How are they adjusting to the present barrage of information in the science ecosystem?
That's exactly it. There's a total barrage of information. There are memos every day that are conflicting, and then they're changed again. It's causing havoc. It really is. We don't know whether we're coming or going. We hear things on the grapevine. They're not always accurate. Doesn't seem to be the source of information. I have several colleagues at the National Institutes of Health, both researchers, intramural, and then also program officers there. And they are flummoxed. They don't know what's happening. Many of them are looking to move on. Many of them have lost their jobs as well. It's all very disturbing and upsetting. And it could have been handled so much better, really, quite honestly. So it's difficult. I'm hoping things are going to calm down and settle down over the next few months. I don't know if that's going to happen. It may be misguided. It's just a real challenge at the moment. I have to say morale is pretty low. Pretty low.
What are you optimistic about at the moment? Let's end on an optimistic note.
Okay, being optimistic is always good. I think I am optimistic because the malaria map is shrinking. So I'm optimistic that we have these new vaccines, that we have new bed nets, that we're coming up with new control measures like bio-pesticides, that there's some very cool and frontline research is being done, not just at the Johns Hopkins Malaria Research Institute, but in other labs worldwide. And so I'm optimistic that actually we are going to get through this blip and really focus towards creating a malaria-free world.
Yeah, absolutely. Any last remarks for me?
No, I don't think so. But it's been a delight to speak with you. Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for speaking with me. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.